And then one day, it struck me, well, this wasn't Leonardo's drawing in the first place. It came from his teacher, Vitruvius. And then I thought, well, once I realized that Vitruvius was his teacher, but his teacher lived 200 years earlier. His teacher was dead. And so I then went back and started studying Vitruvius's work. Vitruvius was his primary instructor on this kind of work. In fact, this drawing, right in the books, it says right down here that these are the human proportions after Vitruvius. And so I studied all Vitruvius's stuff to see what was going on there, and I started going through all of his stuff, and bingo, here's this drawing. At first, I didn't see it. It was a human cannon, and then second, and I'll show it to you, and then all of a sudden it popped out, and I saw it. Here's the 10 by 12. 2 of the 3 pieces were found. And I'll show it to you in a moment. And I was, then I highly suspected that the same kind of information was not just something that Thoth was new, but this was something that was a body of information that had been kept on the earth for a long time. I'm going to slowly bring you to that level right now in just a moment. This is another way to lay the Vesica Pisces down an axis, a different way, which will produce the second level of consciousness. Again, you do the same thing, drawing your lines along the Vesica Pisces, using your Vesica Pisces as the underlying grid, and it comes up with this one. And again, you can see, only now, here's your Vesica Pisces overextends, and you can see that half of it's on one side, half of it's on the other, and you can count it. There'll be 10 this way, and 12 running across this way. So it's a 10 by 12, 100 squares. Could be why there's 100 squares in this thing. And the King's Chamber, as we're going to see, this just struck me right now. I never realized this until this minute. The King's Chamber is one of these guys, and it is made for our level of consciousness. It sits on the floor level. You'll see in a moment that there's another, the very level of stones that it sits in there is another proof, which I'll have to come up with in a minute, that they were referring to our level of consciousness. But the number of stones that the King's Chamber is made out of is exactly 100 stones. I never realized that until now, that it corresponded with this. I'll have to record that in there. I guess I just did. I'm not going to tell you what all this other stuff is, except for one thing. I will tell you in a moment. The 4 squares that are around the body, the center of the body, that are a reflection of the original 8 cells, when I tried to put in these, I took the original 4 squares out of here, and I started putting the spirals in there, and it just kind of goes all over. It doesn't work. And Thoth watched me for a while, and he's sitting there with a grin on his face. And I says, "What are you grinning for?" And he says, "Well, you're probably not going to get that this afternoon." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Would have probably not figured it out. The ratios change. The original 4 squares around the first level of consciousness, if I was assuming that this was 1. But it's not 1, it's 1 squared. Of course, 1 squared equals 1, so how in the heck do you know the difference? There's no way to visually tell the difference. And so when you come to the next one, in order to make the energies work, you have to take, you don't go to 2, but you go to 2 squared, which is 4. And you must take 4 squares as your base. So that the diagonal of 4 squares, which is across 2 of them rather than 1, becomes your key. And so I did that, and so it goes 1, 1, 2, which exactly hits the apex of this point up here, and leaves. And everything, all the synchronicity hits again. And we'll explain what all this is in just a moment. I'll come back to this in just a moment. But anyway, this is the eyeball that we use as a lens to interpret our reality with, and it is the second level, but I'll come back to that in just a moment. And this is Vitruvius's, that's kind of fun to say, Vitruvius's canon of the human body. And at first, it does not look like a 10 by 12 because it's got a whole lot of squares in there. But if you notice, he put these heavy dots on certain ones, and which makes a larger square grid hidden underneath there. And so if you count them, you'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A 100 grid is hidden underneath there. And there's this, looks kind of like a vesica Pisces, but if you actually create it, it is not. The centers won't meet with each other. It's a constructed pattern that is a key that if you then put a compass onto from the center place to that place and spin it around, it will form a circle that will precisely hit the longest finger and forms a 10 by 12 pattern around there. So he had it hidden secretly behind there. And there are a lot of real interesting things about this. He has this diamond pattern here around there like that. The diamond pattern is also the key. Remember the first, second level? The way that remember you had the 3 squares and this middle square, which where we are, to get to the Christ consciousness, you rotate it to a diamond. And so the first one goes like this, the second one goes like that, and the next one goes like this. It's like, and I heard one whale back there. You'll see some more things here. First level consciousness goes like this. Second one goes like that. And the third one goes like this. And it's like the faces of the cube equilibrium that he felt was so important. And so they even have that hidden behind there, even though it doesn't really correspond with a whole lot in there. And the next thing I want you to just notice is that each one of these squares that contains, that is in there, contains 9 squares. Okay? So just remember that thing about the 9 squares and the diamond, because we're going to come back to both of those details a little later. This is Leonardo's drawing of the flower of life, extended out. And he wrote extensively about the flower of life, not just a little bit. He had all kinds of drawings showing this sacred pattern in here and how all the different patterns that were hidden inside of there, the relationships of triangles inside of there, all this various stuff, the seed of life, everything else. These are all the things you'd find in the walls at Abydos on this temple over there. It almost looks like the same kind of stuff that they were doing on those walls over there. And if that isn't enough, he had pages of showing all the angles and possibilities that were contained in there and the rotational patterns that were contained in the flower of life. You can see the spinning rotations and patterns that were down here and over here. And he had pages of this stuff going on and on and on because he understood the underlying patterns of the reality itself. It turns anybody into that. I mean, it's so after I saw that, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but there's no doubt in my mind he was heading down the exact same pathway that we are in this room right now.
Maybe he had a teacher like you.
Huh?
Maybe he had a teacher like you.
Well, he had Vitruvius. He had all of Vitruvius's works and everything, and that's what he was studying. Plus, he was a Mason. It was through the Masons that he got that, and he had all that information there. But I just didn't realize that the Masons had this. But yet, when I talked to that guy, when I talked to the guy that came into my room that was a Mason, I was asking him all kinds of questions, and he just kept saying, "I don't know. I think that we have lost a whole lot in present day time. I don't think the Masons know a lot of this anymore, though maybe they do. I don't want to discredit them, but I just have a feeling that a lot of this has been lost." I have been searching for the canon of Christ consciousness, which they must have. But as I was searching for it, I suddenly started getting discouraged because I realized that if they did have a canon, these guys built these massive churches to Christ. This was the most holy, sacred work of their life. And if they did have the sacred geometry of Christ consciousness, they're not going to have it laying around somewhere. It's going to be locked up in gold boxes and buried 80 feet into the ground or somewhere, and I'm probably not going to find it very easily. And I've never been able, and I've looked through everything I can, and I've never been able to find it. But this is it, right here. But
I read that somewhere that the rest of his work is in the bag and locked up.
of whose work? She said she read that the rest of the work of Leonardo da Vinci was locked up in the Vatican. That would make sense. Yes.
As I understand it from studying the Masons, I'm not one, you don't get the knowledge till your 33rd degree. Did the guy who walked in your room, was he a 33rd degree?
Well, I don't know. This is true, but I have talked to people that are 33 degree who have seen this and said that this was, they had never received anything from this level.
Because I know Walt Disney was one. I mean, there are people
That
who...
makes sense too. He actually did a sacred geometry Donald Duck move.
Yeah.
This is a cube. Quack, quack. There's more than one Donald Duck? She asked which Donald Duck was it? Oh, I don't know.
Donald Duck in mathematical.
Donald Duck in mathemagical land?
Mathematical land.
Mathemagic land. Okay. Well, anyway, this is it. And you can go straight to it because you can you've got all nine concentric circles and it automatically makes the grids. You don't have to go through that complex before. And the interesting thing is the one that forms this one that makes the grid around the body is not 1 squared but 2 squared but 3 squared, which is 9 squares. And remember on Vitruvius' thing, every one of the squares had 9 squares in there. Again, one of the keys showing how it was the key that linked up to the next one. And so 9 squares is the key to that one. And then so you have to go across 3 squares to get your yardstick of 1 to make everything work. And again, 3, 3, perfectly touching the apex of there and leaving. And this is Christ consciousness here. It's the lens that the next third level interprets the reality through. Now, this next drawing is not completely mine, and I really don't know. I want to give credit for who did this, though I don't know who did it, because so many people have tried to take credit for this. Elizabeth Clare Prophet said it was hers, but it couldn't have been hers because James Blair had done it 10 years earlier, and he doesn't claim that it is his. And he says that he got it from a much earlier source. So I don't know where the source came from. I don't know if it goes back to Egypt or somewhere like that. But what you're about to see, if you've never seen this before, most of you have seen this on a video, but if you've never seen this before, this is a rather remarkable piece of work. We're going to take these 3 pieces and that you just saw and superimpose them over this drawing that you're about to see, this new one. But if you would carefully, and I want to make a thing about this, I have not drawn this to in this drawing, I did not draw it to precise proportions, though I know what the precise proportions are, and I have drawn the drawing, and I think I've got them back here. I just thought I put them in there. We'll see if I did in a moment. But if not, the proportions are ever so slightly different. And what I would like you to do is to just strictly follow where I'm showing you on the screen so that we can make some sense out of this. And that is, first of all, you see the red grid of the 8-cell division. This guy, right? Everybody see that around here? There's the 8 cells. There's a square that fits around the 8 cells. The dotted line is the inner surface of the zona pellucida, and the solid line will be the outer surface of the zona pellucida, or the place that it goes into phi ratio. And now, of course, at the same time, though I don't have it drawn on here, you've got the human body in here, stretched across here like Leonardo. So you've got both the 8 cells division and the human body. Now, if you take a circle, this blue one that goes around here, it just fits in from the top of the head of the human body to the bottom of the feet of the human body, or around the square that will fit around the original 8 cells, either one. And then you make a circle that will fit perfectly at the phi ratio point up here, this one up here, that will just touch this circle and be originated from that place, which happens to be the 13th chakra above your head. Well, yeah, you are coming up with it. This does come back up with that image that the Masons drew in that first one. And it also began to tell me what these places are that they drew to. And what I now know is that in the human body, it's the navel. That's what that spot is right there that this comes up to. It's exactly to where the belly button is. But what all these things are in here is it has to do, and we'll talk about these later, there's a sphere that will move through here and touch all 4 spheres. It's real important. There's another one inside, if you could get it in there, that would touch all 8 of these. The relationship of those 2 spheres, if you put a square around the little one, and if you drew these to the proper proportion, if you put a square around the one that fits through there, relative to the one that sits inside, makes a holographic image of the whole one, and it forms a phi ratio again. And it's another key to all of this. And that, according to Thoth, was why the Lucifer rebellion happened.
Is the difference?
We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the inner aspect of the whole thing has an outer image of what's on the outer aspect of the whole thing. But there is there's a great cosmic controversy over all this, which I'll bring up later. It's the reason why that Lucifer did what he did, but I have to wait till I get there to explain it. Here I was just going to show you the next thing I was going to come up and show you is the pyramid, and then show you the actual pyramid. This is the angle that they're referring to over here. Now these are the drawings that these next 2 drawings are of incredible importance for some people. Not for most of you guys. But the inner circle that passes through the middle determines, if it's set up here, see the circle here? If you set it up here, it will determine the inner thickness of the zona pellucida. The inner circle that will fit inside the middle, if you run them over, they will exactly make, if this is a 64 grid, it will exactly form the original 4 squares in the middle. And if you run it over, it will tell you where the outer thickness of the zona pellucida is. And again, those 2 circles become very, very important. And this is the one where you got these are the precise proportions now. If you ran a square around that one, it would form a phi ratio like the bigger one. And there is another geometrical problem that one would have to solve if you wanted to know everything about the subject. And that is that taking this structure over here, you can see this Star of David pattern around here, which forms a cube, which is sitting at an angle, right? And we know that is, or at least, I guess I'm just basically telling you, that is the way that the energy field sits around the body. But remember, we also had a square going this way, right? So we have a square going this way and a square going tilted. And there has to be a mathematical relationship between those, or everything was wrong. Took a long time to figure it out. This is it right here. That white tetrahedron is like this green one right here, and the black one, I think it is, comes down like this here, forming this pattern like that. And this is the square that we see going around the body. And these happen to be where the lines are that were drawn on Leonardo's drawing. He divided the whole thing into 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. The piece that comes over the top and the bottom is the length of your hand and all that other stuff. So you can actually see the tilted square or the star tetrahedral field in relationship to the square at this time. And you can mathematically see how the two link together. It was real important for me to see that, because once I saw that there was this square this way and also this way, I had to find the link, or my mind would never stop. It would just keep going. Because then I would have this little doubt in my head in there going, about all of this. But once I found all of this, it solved the problems for me. We got 4 minutes for questions.
One thing I wanted to ask you, when we were speaking about the sacred geometry and shapes, and I forget where it was I had the question, I had it written down here, but my question was...
I'm kind of sorry. I want to apologize in a way that you guys can't hit your questions right when they're saying them, right when I'm doing them, but
it's
got to do it this
to
way.
deal with the architecture. And what came to me, my question was, when we're dealing with the sacred geometry and we're building things in the third dimension based on sacred geometry, that they're forming these shapes of beauty, do they only resonate on the third dimension, or do these shapes actually, because of their proportions, do they exist on other levels also?
Yeah, they do.
They extend out in this octave?
And from another point of view, anything that, we'll talk about this later, anything that exists in third dimension first existed in fourth and higher, but it had to first come through fourth before it got to third.
Even if it's not within ratio of using phi and things of that nature to
Even if it's not, no matter what it is. Everything that was created synthetically, say you made this thing, was first created out of your imagination and brought down through the causal planes and slowly brought down through the various levels until you manifested it. And it had to pass through the fourth dimensional level of existence before, which would not look like this. Because it would
Okay,
look
so
like
then my question is, if it is within sacred geometry and is within proportion, does it stay the same, or does it also still continue to shift on each dimension, or does it stay the same shape?
No, shape from one place to the next is utterly, completely, totally, utterly different.
But
Though there is a mathematical relationship to it, it is not the same.
Well, then,
Experientially, if you were to look at a cube here and to see a cube in the fourth dimension, you wouldn't recognize the two.
okay, so the sequences and things of that nature shift also as we move into another dimension.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so all that you've been teaching us is the mathematical proportions that exist on the third dimension.
Yes, but it all applies on all levels.
Right.
Everything
With
keeps...
Fibonacci and things, those apply.
Everything
on other
apply.
levels? They don't shift?
Things will change, but if there's a change, there'll be a mathematical reason why they changed. There's a logicalness to everything, all the way through. There's no just something that just happens. It all comes out of a sphere. Once you know the sphere, everything else will be generated and come back to it in one way or another. There's no surprises on those kind of levels at all. Eventually the mind, you got to get bigger and bigger heads and skulls and to comprehend all this stuff. But there's no changes. And this thing of objects having to first come into fourth dimension first and then third is real important, because when we start looking about the ancient civilizations and what goes on with the grid patterns that create these civilizations, and what happens when these grid patterns are I'll just say it right now. If you have a third dimensional object, even though it was created by maybe one person or a group of people, it is not. It's really just light. It's just a thought pattern. It's a standing waveform, and but it is maintained in the reality not by the person who created it, but by the grid that we all have in common. If the grid is broken down, all the thought patterns go back into energy. All synthetic objects dissolve away. And they return back into elements. And they don't hold their shape or their pattern. And so when a consciousness leaves and it dissolves its grid, now I'm talking about the grid that extends around the entire planet, like 50, 60 miles up around the planet, then all synthetic stuff goes with it. It's for this reason that a very intelligent race, if they want to leave something on the planet that is going to last for a long time, that's going to go through these dimensional shifts that we go through, and it's going to stay there, then the only way that they can do it, well, it's not the only way, there is other ways, but it requires concentration and a lot of energy. The only way they can do it easily is to take matter that is of the planet, which will naturally move through the dimensional levels. So, which is not based upon a grid. It's based upon the energies of the planet itself. So if you wanted to build the Great Pyramid, you don't make it out of ABS plastic or stainless steel, because when we went through the first shift, it's gone. So you use very hard materials that are out of the earth itself. It isn't that they're primitive in doing that, they're just smart, that's all. They just know that if they want something to stay with that planet for a long time, you make it out of the natural materials of that planet. You could make it out of synthetic materials, but they would have to set up Merkaba fields or something around them, and then they would have to maintain them and in various ways, which is difficult to do. And so it's easier to just use something natural. Okay, now we're going to look at these internal structure rooms inside of the Great Pyramid. The reason we're going to do that is because when Akhenaten gave the Egyptian mystery school of Akhenaten the Law of One, he in those last 5.5 years, the way that he trained the people to go in to become to go into the immortal state, or the state of awareness of this, had to do with these 3 chambers in the Great Pyramid. This is the King's Chamber up here, the Queen's Chamber, and what's sometimes called as the Well. And those 3 places were the primary places that were used, though there may have been other places in there also. They're still discovering more places in there all the time. They've discovered 3 more rooms in the Great Pyramid just in the last year, or maybe, no, more than that, 2 or 3 years or so. And anyway, I want to describe these 3 rooms and what they are. This is called the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber. It has nothing to do with kings and queens. This is called it was the Arabs who called this the King's and Queen Chamber. The Arabs bury their men in flat roofs, and they bury their women in pitched roofs, and so that's why it was called the King and Queen's Chamber. If these had been reversed around, they would reverse the names around. And this was never a burial chamber for a person. That was not its purpose, ever. Okay, that's the side view of the King's Chamber, which looks like this. And again, the King's Chamber is 2 squares, and the diagonal of that ceiling height is exactly 1/2 the diagonal, which means that if you're in that room, by measuring the diagonal half, it folds down and marks a very specific spot in the precise center of the room. There are 2 places of initiation in this room. One of them is right about here. You come in over here, which is where the sarcophagus sits, and the other one is in the precise center of the room. They're different. Just to go through the initiation spots, you begin down here at the end of this tunnel, which we haven't talked about yet. You then go to the King's Chamber. You first go into that tunnel, you wait a few years, You then go into the king's chamber, and you immediately go to the queen's chamber, which is where you get stabilized. You wait a few years, and then you come back and complete it in the center here. It's the final one. This is where they tell you, yes, you really did do it. And so over the top of here, there are these 5 little chambers over the top of the king's chamber. Now what present-day Egyptian archaeologists say is that those chambers are there to relieve the weight load or the pressure off of that flat roof so that it won't collapse. That's the official purpose of those chambers. But you could say, well, why don't they have any chambers over this one? Because it's a lot further down and a lot more weight. And they could say, well, it's got a pitched roof on it, and they don't need it as much. Then you could say, well, what about this one way down here? It's got a flat roof on it, and there's no chambers on it. And it's got zillions and billions and trillions of more tons of weight on it. And they'll just go, well, I don't know. You know, and there is a very specific reason for these chambers up here, and I'm going to try to explain it. But you can get a real good idea when you look at how they're constructed. There are 9 super heavy stones, one-piece stones in the ceiling. And again, like I said, there's 100 stones if you count every stone in the room. And those over the top of those 9 stones, there is this series of stones that look kind of like this, where the bottom of these series of stones is polished like glass, and the top of the stones is bumpy and uneven. And then there is an air space with another series of stones that comes sort of like this. And I'm going to put all of these in here first, and then I'll talk about it. How many stones what? Oh, that was 6.
This is a side view.
Yeah. Okay. Each one of these things is polished like glass with air underneath it, and then on top of it is a totally irregular, bumpy surface covered with about 1/4 inch of black foam. Looks like it was sprayed out of a spray can. If you just by looking at this, if you know anything about reflection and absorption, this is reflecting something this way and absorbing something that's coming from above. It's a separator, a divider of 2 different kinds of energies. Okay, now that you can see that, what we're going to do now is superimpose those 3 sets of, what Tho says is if you take those 3 levels of consciousness, the diagrams, superimpose them over the diagram of the earth with a great pyramid on it, you can then begin to understand what all these rooms are and why they're placed in those particular positions and everything else of that nature. Now, this one is the first level of consciousness. For those of you who know, the pyramid is based on thirds. That's the primary division factor that is in there. You'll see why they chose thirds right now. The pyramid is used for the second level of consciousness to go to the third level of consciousness. That's its whole soul, purpose, and function on consciousness level. There's a lot of other, lots and lots of other reasons why it exists. It's for the initiation process that was designed in there, or tuned in there, was for us to go to Christ consciousness. It was not for the aberrational to come to us or up there for the first level. So from second level to go to third level. And if you drew the pyramid across the earth right here and up to the top, which I don't have on here, you would see that the steps between the base of the pyramid and the top of the pyramid would be into fifths. It'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's not divisible by 3. However, here's the pyramid now. And if you notice, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is divisible by 3. And the Christ consciousness one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, also divisible by 3, which is the reason why thirds were chosen. Now coming back to this one, look at the black and white spiraling energy that comes out of this area. That's why I chose this square up here before. You have a black light spiral coming like this, and you have a white light spiral that just happens to hit the absolute apex of the pyramid and leave. It comes up out there. And supposing you wanted to connect in with just the white light spiral. These are very powerful energy beams that are coming in out of this mass of energy. It's the reason why the mass is so great, that creates these fields. And you want to connect in just with the white light one, which comes out of there and spirals out and reaches deep, 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 deep into space. He says it goes all the way to the center of the galaxy. I don't know. I guess so. And but you got a certain electrical problem in that right above you, you have the black light spiral originating also. And so you say you want to separate those two things out. This was the king's chamber was put. Here's the center of the pyramid. It was put off center. Where they placed it was right here. They don't know why it was off center. It wasn't on center because they wanted to get in here. They can't come up here to get it. They can't come down here because they cross at this point. So they came to this place right here, but then they had this problem. And that was the reason for all those chambers going in there, was to separate the black from the white, get them to two places, so that when you were sitting in the sarcophagus, you could tune into only this one energy field. Otherwise, you'd have both of them originating there. You would be almost impossible to distinguish one from the other. And it was the male energy lines that they were concerned with, not the curving female one. The curving female one has no distinguishing mark on it. But the male one is countable. 1, 1, 2, 3, set at 90-degree turns. Now, one more thing to notice about this arrangement up here. If this was the pyramid, yes, the room is off-center. It sits like that, kind of. But the sarcophagus sits in a place like this, which is in the exact center of the pyramid. So when you are laying down in the sarcophagus with your head facing toward the center of the back wall, you have this, they tune to the, you have the white light one, the female one coming in too. They tune to the black one, the male one rather, of the white. And it would come in like this, it would hit the very center and rise up, come right up from underneath, come right through where the head is, so that when you laid down, you could tune your head and get the pineal passing right through the center of your pineal gland. That was the whole purpose of what was going on. Your head is toward the door. Same wall as the door, which is toward the center of the huh?
Is it north, south, east, west?
I believe that it is toward the north. It's coming up at a 45-degree angle, right through your pineal gland. And there's a little bit of proof in this that that's how they used it, because recently they have discovered that when a person goes into theta, that there is a chemical that is excreted from the pituitary gland right in here, which comes out as a sweat, and then it crystallizes into this white powder, crystalline white powder, if you stay in there for very long. And when they first opened the sarcophagus, they noticed all this white powder at one end. And they scooped it all up, and it's put into a little glass vial, and it now sits in the British Museum. And it wasn't until just recently that they discovered that it was the same chemical that's excreted when someone is deeply into theta. And it was a lot of powder. It wasn't just one guy dying and having a good time dying in there. I mean, it was a lot of people over a long period of time. Unless he had a real sweaty gland, I guess. So, what they would do is, after going through 12 years of the left eye of Horus and 12 years of the right eye of Horus, and then you were all ready, they took you and they put you into the sarcophagus, they put the lid on, and they left you in there for approximately 3.5 days. And then you would tune to that field, and you would follow the energy out and returning. If it was a logarithmic spiral that they had taken off on, there's no beginning and no end. They would not know how to come back. But because it was Fibonacci and it has a starting point, they can count the turns. And they were trained to do this. They could count their turns right back and come back at 5, 3, 2, 1, 1, and back in their body. They could locate their body in the spiral. And that was all part of the training. This is according to Thoth. It's so outrageous that how could anybody ever just figure it out? I don't know. But that is what they did. And then once they had that, they got out of there, and they were like totally blown away from it all. They were then brought down into the Queen's chamber, from which in the Queen's chamber, it was some kind of stabilizing experience, so that they wouldn't lose the experience. A lot of times you can have a very powerful experience in life, and then as you start going through life, it kind of fades away. It gets weaker. They did something to them in the Queen's chamber that would lock it in so they wouldn't lose the experience. And I'm not exactly sure what that was. But there was something that leads into the Queen's chamber, a very little known thing, which might bring us home a little bit. Now the other, that was the middle initiation. There's 3 initiations altogether. The first initiation begins down here. Now there's a room down here with a tunnel that just goes down and ends in nowhere. They don't have any idea why it's there. They don't know. They got a pretty good idea now because we told them. And they've sealed it off with big bars to make sure nobody gets in there anymore. But they did know that there was it was really strange, because when we first got there, they had barred it off up at the top. They just barred the whole thing off and made it illegal to go in there. I mean, you went in there, right to jail. I mean, they even had a guy with a machine gun sitting there for a long time, make sure that no one messed around with it. And the reason was because so many people that have went down there have died. Lots of them. Or have been maimed, or have been poisoned, or sent into hospitals. And by means that no one can understand, they have found poisonous snakes down in there that don't exist in Egypt, or poisonous spiders that don't exist in Egypt. Poisonous gases have just appeared out of nowhere. On and on and on. Stuff like this. And it's all documented. And the government will clearly admit to it, the whole thing. They just don't know what is going on down here, and so they just sealed the whole thing off and won't let you in there. We have clearly shown to them that that's not the problem. The problem is at the end of this tunnel. And so since then, they have opened the doors up, and you can now go down in here, but the tunnel is blocked off and sealed, so you can't get inside of it. It's big, heavy bars. Did you have a quick question?
Yeah. What is the pit?
Who knows? Nobody knows what the pit is. The pit is the mystery of the pyramid for me. The pit is is a room. It's a big pit. But that's where they put the workers. No, but on the edge of this pit is what looks like a golden mean, big, huge block, polished, clean, smooth, of granite. I think it's granite. And it looks like it's ready. It looks like you can just push it over and it would fall. And I've sat and thought about this a long time, and I'm sure it's meant to fall at the right moment. It will, and probably will shake the whole earth somehow. I don't know what it's meant to do. But that block is ready to go, and it isn't.
It looks like a room.
Well, that isn't the exact shape of it. I just... a womb? Don't let that lady see any ink blots, man. Okay. Anyway, I don't know what the pit is. I really don't know. I'm sorry, but I don't know what it is. But it is something very special. Well, okay, I'm going to tell a story about it. And it is a fourth dimensional tunnel. This is why all these things would appear in here. You go into the fourth dimension. The end of it extends into the fourth dimension. And when you go in there, whatever you think and whatever you feel literally happens. And so if you're uninitiated and you go in there and you have any fears, they become real. If you're afraid of something, then that thing becomes real and it'll kill you. If it's your fear, if your fear is of drowning, the whole place would fill up with water. You can't have any fears and go into the fourth dimension, or they will become real. And we're going to talk about that a lot too. Okay.
Did you just say this was the first level of initiation?
This is the first level of
Why
initiation.
did you have all your fears manifested before you made it?
You have to work with those first. The first 12 years of training, which we're going to show you in a little bit, was the left eye of Horus, and that's where you dealt with all your fears. Once you got through all your fears, I mean, you got to be with a place where you could be so fearless that if they said anything, you'd be able to do it without even a heartbeat, and could not be afraid of dying at all in any way, shape, or form, or any of the other fears that are associated with humankind. You could be fearless. It's the only way you can get through. And all the world's religions dealt with this. Like some of them were incredible, the things they would do to get you to get into a fearless state. And then the 12 years after that was the training on the mental planes and the stuff, like kind of things that we're going through to get the understanding. And then once you had the emotional and mental balance and all of this stuff, then they would have you begin in this little chamber down here. Let me show you why the wall, this tunnel, just goes out in the middle of nowhere. Look what happens with the black light spiral. It comes right down here. So what they did is, they had, the room was right here, and they dug the tunnel over to where the black light spiral arm was reached. And they did it down here and not up here because this goes through 0 point. And they didn't want to get it up in here because whoever got it up in here would have to go through the great void. And they wanted to catch it after it was outside of the great void, after they got outside of 0 point. And so it begins with the experience that takes you into the darkness rather than into the light, or the halls of Amente. That's what it's called. It's literally an infinite space. And so, the same way, there's this long tunnel. There's this tunnel, and you've got this, I believe it actually comes from this direction now I think about it. Like this. And the person would sit in, originally they would sit with their knees folded up like this, but the tunnel's only about that high. And We can't do that. So what I had to do was to lay down with my body like this, and then you line that beam up to your head, and you can feel it. It feels like somebody's got a... It's real strong. I mean, you can't miss it. There's no way you could possibly miss this one. And you've got 2.5 million blocks of mass forming this thing. And then we all had to lay down. There was 5 of us, like this. But the hieroglyphics, when you see the hieroglyphics around this, you'll see them like this, sitting like this. And this will be Osiris. And there'll be like 40 or 50 of these guys inside this tunnel. This tunnel like 75 feet or 100 feet long. And so Osiris will be sitting here, facing that way, and then all these other people will be facing this way. And he's taking them into the halls of Durante.